Part 10. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Xiao. Chapter 95. Monkey. Seeing the caller ID, Su Tong couldn't help but feel a little surprised or even surprised. You must know that before entering the building, the mobile phone signal has been lost. Even if he tried to contact Monkey, he could not reach him. He could only choose to search from the 25th floor to the top. He immediately pressed the answer button. On the other end of the phone was a monkey's voice, but the voice didn't sound so optimistic. "Younghui, where are you?" Monkey's voice was very weak, and his words seemed weak. "I'm in the postal building." "Where are you?" "I'm going to find you now." He could tell that the monkey was in poor condition, so he quickly asked about the monkey's location. There was plenty of food and water in his prop book. As long as he found the monkey, he would be able to help him survive. "You fool, why are you here?" The monkey's voice suddenly became urgent, as if he was surprised and angry that he was here. He seemed to be complaining about why he came to this hellish place to die. "Don't talk nonsense. It's not safe here either. Please tell me quickly, where are you?" Su Tong stepped on the body of the schizophrenia girl and asked the monkey. The monkey was silent for a while, and then he heard the hoarse voice on the other side, "I'm in the basement." Buzz. The fire escape stairs were slowly pushed open. I glanced at the numbers on the stairwell and saw that I was already on the 5th floor. The soles of the shoes already feel sticky, and the dark red ground gives you the feeling of stepping on glue every time you lift it up. The thick smell of blood in the air once had the urge to suffocate people. But what was in front of them still looked like steps leading to the abyss. It was not easy to walk down from the 28th floor. As Monkey said in his previous text message, many infected people are hiding in the corridors, it seems because the temperature in the corridors is much lower than outside. But fortunately, with Big Fat, a gold medal thug, it is extremely easy to deal with these infected people, and it is also very economical. It only takes a bottle of Coke or some snacks for 1 kilometer. Occasionally, Su Tong would strike a spot that Big Fatty missed, or use the machete in his hand to teach these infected people how to become a qualified corpse. However, after reaching this point, Big Fatty began to feel a little timid, and even walked behind him, and the gold medal thug instantly turned into a bronze burden. He looked back at Big Fatty and saw that Big Fatty had already begun to hesitate in his steps as he reached this point. "Are you scared?" Su Tong asked softly. Big Fat hesitated for a moment, then nodded and whispered, "There are bad people down there." Big Fat said very little, and this was not the first time he had told him such words, but at this moment he had to pay attention. Judging from the state of the schizophrenia woman when Big Fatty saw it, it seemed that Big Fatty was not a coward. The position of the schizophrenia woman should be an administrative staff such as a secretary. Big Fat seems to have a strong hatred for her. Of course, he doesn't know what kind of hatred it is. Ask Big Fat and he won't tell. But judging from the way he dared to fight the schizophrenia girl, the bad guy he was talking about wasn't necessarily just in terms of identity. There might also be some other power under this building that frightened him more. So the question is, how did the monkey get from the roof to the basement? This doubt puzzled him, but after the monkey finished speaking, the phone signal disappeared, which undoubtedly cast a shadow on his heart. 2 floors down is the 3rd floor. If you are really scared, just wait for me on the 3rd floor. Seeing that the fat man's fear of facing the corridor was getting deeper and deeper, he didn't want to embarrass this little brother anymore and asked him to wait for him on the 3rd floor. He remembered that when he was outside, he saw that there seemed to be an iron door on the 3rd floor that led directly to the outside. In addition, the height of the floor is not high. After I escape, I can let the Big Fat jump down from the 3rd floor and walk with me. Big Fatty seemed to be very moved by such a proposal, reluctantly nodded, and then continued walking down with Su Tong. After the two arrived at the 3rd floor, they pushed open the fire door on the 3rd floor. I saw that the third floor was actually a mobile phone repair department. There was no one in the maintenance department. Come to think of it, the virus broke out around 6:30 in the morning. How could the people in the mobile phone maintenance department go to work so early? There is an escalator next to it that can go directly down to the first floor. Yes, it saves a lot of trouble. Boom. He casually smashed open the glass in the maintenance room, and while the building still had electricity, Su Tong turned on the air conditioner. I also thoughtfully found him a game console, a bunch of snacks, and a big bucket of Coke. Snacks, games, snacks, cola, and air conditioning are all working together. I believe you will be the happiest kid in the apocalypse. Stay here and wait for me to come back. After comforting Big Fatty, he was leaving. But at this time, the big fat man grabbed his clothes, hesitantly, as if he didn't want him to continue walking down. Seeing that this big fat boy could still care about him at this time, Su Tong felt that it was worthwhile for him to fight with the gastroschisis woman. I have to go down. This is not only my task, but also an explanation for myself. Don't worry, I will definitely come back. I will take you with me when the time comes. Let's go eat delicious food. After Su Tong repeated his assurances, Big Fatty was willing to let go and reluctantly watched Su Tong push open the fire door. Without Big Fat as a strong human shield, Su Tong walked very slowly every step of the way. Fortunately, he has dark vision, and this ability has been a great help to him. Otherwise, walking forward in the dark in this dark corridor, no matter how strong he is, he would not be able to bear it. When he passed through the first floor, he stepped more carefully. When he got out of the elevator, he hurriedly pressed the first floor button, wondering if the centipede monster was also on the first floor. It's not that he's afraid of that kid, it's that he doesn't want to cause trouble at this time. He needs to find the monkey as soon as possible, complete his identity mission, and then leave here. This is his ultimate goal in coming to this building. Fortunately, he didn't hear the piercing cry until he passed through the first floor. After passing through the first floor and arriving at the basement level, Su Tong carefully pushed open the fire door in front of him. Stretching out his hand, he opened his eyes in the palm of his hand and looked left, right, up and down. He saw only a few cars parked in the empty underground garage in front of him. The lights not far from the garage flickered, illuminating a small part of the huge garage. By the way, I would like to mention that my dark vision does not limit the number of eyeballs, and the lightning pupils in my palm can also enjoy the blessing of this ability. This can be regarded as an unexpected blessing. In short, it is a lot more convenient. Seeing that there was no one in the garage, Su Tong wanted to continue walking to the second floor, but when he turned around, he found that the corridor leading to the second floor had been blocked by a pile of messy debris. Monkey! Su Tong tried to shout softly, but received no response. In desperation, he could only choose to continue walking down from the garage. After opening the door, walk along the corner of the garage. These basements are often connected, so you don't have to worry about finding the passage to the next floor. As I walked, there was still a smell in the air. The smell was very strange, with a fishy smell, but it was definitely not the smell of a rotting corpse. On the contrary, it tastes a bit like pickled fish. Who bought the salted fish? Did it stink in the garage? The strong stench hit him, and Su Tong couldn't help complaining, but luckily, compared to the black stuff he spit out, he could actually accept the smell. He was walking forward following the smell. Suddenly, he stopped and stared straight ahead. Right in front of him, a Doraemon-shaped cartoon doll was standing motionless next to the car. When he took a closer look, he found that the doll was leaning against the car sideways, looking like a fake. For this reason, he stood out from behind the car and waved to the doll. Only after confirming that this thing was really a doll did he feel relieved. Buzz, buzz. At this time, Su Tong raised his eyebrows and took out his mobile phone. It was still a monkey, but it was not a phone call, but several consecutive text messages. Seeing this, he did not click on the text message. Instead, he checked the signal of his mobile phone and found that in this place, the mobile phone could actually receive a weak signal. The text message seemed to have been sent by the monkey early in the morning, but due to the signal, he did not receive the message until now. He opened the text message and saw the first text message appearing in front of him: "I was caught by someone, a perverted woman and a monster, but she didn't eat me, but threw me into the basement." This was the first short message. When Su Tong saw this message, the first thing he thought of was the schizophrenia girl. It was probably her who caught the monkey. Although the reason is not known, at least it seems that the monkey is still alive at this time. So he clicked on the second message. "Young Hui, I beg you, don't come down. I regret it. I shouldn't have told you where I am. Listen to me and leave quickly." He casually crossed over this text message and continued to click on the next text message. The next message was still "persuading myself," so I crossed it as usual. After 5 or 6 text messages, Monkey finally stopped trying to persuade him and instead sent a message with his specific location. "There are still a few people here. We are locked in a small room in the basement. If you see the message and find a red door, we are inside, but you must be careful. There are many monsters down here. Especially this monster." The text message was accompanied by a photo. After Su Tong clicked on it, probably because of the poor signal here, the photos were being read for a long time until about 10 seconds passed. Little by little, the photos began to become clearer from top to bottom, but then a blurry photo appeared in front of him. He suddenly froze, holding one hand calmly on the handle of the knife, and at the same time squinting his eyes to the left. He saw that the blurry photo on his phone was a cartoon doll in the shape of a Doraemon. And when he looked at the doll again, the doll that was leaning next to the car had actually disappeared. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 96. And when he looked at the doll again, the doll that was leaning next to the car had actually disappeared. Seeing the disappearing doll, Su Tong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. A strong sense of crisis came over him. He had no time to think about it, and his body suddenly jumped forward. The next second, he saw the figure appearing where he was standing just now. Got a kitchen knife. When he turned around, he realized that the kitchen knife had disappeared and a leaflet was left on the ground. The content on the flyer is no longer important, but if you look closely, you will find that the words "kill, kill, kill" are written all over the leaflet in blood. Su Tong glanced at the flyer, quickly turned around and ran forward. Although there was nothing behind him, he could feel something following him, like a shadow, making you feel a sharp suffocation in your throat all the time. Boom! The blade suddenly pierced out from the void, but Su Tong was well prepared to call out Xiaopang and block it in front of him. The huge force immediately caused sparks to fly from Xiaopang's body. Hey hey! Under the sneaky laughter, when the puppet appeared again, it was already 10 meters away from him. Holding a flyer in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, the simple and honest Doraemon shape swayed its body from side to side. At first glance, it actually looks a little cute. Flash. Invisibility. Su Tong looked at the doll, and he probably understood the ability of this thing. It seemed a bit similar to the dagger used by the ranger last time. It had the ability to flash, and the distance was about 10 meters. Another ability is invisibility. These two abilities are very strong, and appearing in an evolved person at the same time is undoubtedly very difficult to deal with. At this moment, he glanced at the water pipe above the roof of the car, and his heart moved. He looked at the flyer in the puppet's hand, and he immediately had an idea. Can't you change your headgear? If you hand out flyers with such an ugly headgear, the devil will want your flyers. I think you should go home and lie down. Hearing this, the puppet paused for a moment, looked at the flyer in his hand and let out an angry scream. The figure suddenly disappeared into the air. The next second, the kitchen knife with cold light was facing Su Tong. Cut off the head. I've been waiting for you. Facing the attacking kitchen knife, Su Tong waved his hand, and a woven bag was thrown out of his hand. It suddenly exploded under the chop of the kitchen knife, and his eyes instantly turned into a snow-white world. Realizing that the puppet had been fooled, he quickly flashed 10 meters away, but his action was still too late. The plush puppet coat was already covered with white flour. Seeing where he suddenly appeared, Su Tong waved and threw the paper flying knife, but the target of the flying knife was not the doll man, but the fire sprinkler above his head. To be precise, it was the small red glass tube in the middle of the fire sprinkler. 10 meters away, such a small thing would be difficult for ordinary people to hit with a flying knife. But Su Tong can do it. With a 50% control bonus, this is not difficult at all. Boom! As the glass tube was shattered by the flying knife, the spray from the top of the doll's head suddenly sprayed down. Now it was covered with flour, and now it was drenched with water. Su Tong couldn't help showing cruelty on his face. He smiled ferociously, opened his palms, and a ball of silver current suddenly flashed around the doll. Zit-size. The lightning flashed away, the doll twitched a few times, and was about to run away in a flash. But even though he teleported, his body was covered in sticky flour. No matter where he teleported, Su Tong could catch him immediately. And he also discovered that the doll's teleportation ability actually has a big flaw, that is, it has to pause in place for a second every time it teleports. 1 second is very short, but at this time, it has become his fatal flaw. As soon as he stopped, Su Tong's shrill laughter came from behind. Dance. Zit-size. In an instant, electric current penetrated the puppet man's body, causing his limbs to twitch unnaturally, and he mumbled something incomprehensible, but he couldn't hear a single word clearly. Jump faster. Su Tong increased the current, and suddenly silver lightning flashed. Whoa! The puppet's body twitched wantonly, as if he had used all his strength to teleport again. Along with the familiar sense of shuttle, the figure at the next moment was already hiding behind a car. However, before the puppet could breathe a sigh of relief, Su Tong's sneer sounded in his ears, "Are you ready?" When the puppet body froze, his instinct was to teleport, but Su Tong's movements were always one step ahead of him. Zzz. As the arc of electricity surged into the body, screams of despair and resentment suddenly erupted from the puppet's mouth. What's even more hateful is that at this time, this damn human being actually took out his Walkman and pressed the play button, and the familiar old classic song came from it. It's better to dance and chat than to dance. Making yourself feel comfortable is everyone's talent. Keep dancing. Accompanied by exciting music. In the huge underground parking lot, a strange scene was playing out. A young man holding a machete flashed a dazzling electric light in one hand, but in front of him was a figure in a puppet suit twisting his body crazily. The image is unimaginably witty, but it seems so funny in the apocalyptic context. This also made Su Tong have to sigh. It is really fun to use the ability without script points. The only pity is that this ability is temporary. It would be great if it could be stronger and become permanent. Su Tong thought secretly in his heart. About the time of a song, white smoke began to rise from the puppet's body, and all the water on his body had dried and evaporated. There was only a boom sound, and the puppet costume on his body was it actually exploded. Seeing that the puppet man could no longer dance, Su Tong could only raise his sword with regret on his face to free him. Flutter. A head with white smoke rolled out of Doraemon's hood. Turning off the music, Su Tong's ears already received a prompt from space. Side Mission 3, Hunting Mutants completed. You complete the side mission and randomly unlock a prop card Leopard Soul Cloak. As the prompt in his ear ended, Su Tong's eyes lit up. This was one of his most practical prop cards. With the passive blessing of Leopard Soul Cloak, and the increase of my overall quality to 80%, it is simply not too satisfying. If he looked at the head in front of him, and his eyes gradually became eager. He raised his hand and cut open the head in front of him with a knife, only to see a silver crystal about the size of a small fingernail appear in his sight. Compared to the schizophrenia girl, this brain crystal is much smaller. He took out a roll of toilet paper and a bottle of mineral water, and after vigorously scrubbing it several times, he was about to put the brain crystal in his mouth and eat it. "Don't eat it." A warning sound quietly appeared in his ears. The sound was as empty as a deep valley and as ethereal as a dream. It seemed as if it was right next to his ears, yet it felt like it was far away. Who? For a moment, Su Tong felt as if a bolt from the blue had struck him in the head, and as if someone had poured a basin of cold water on him from head to toe. His scalp felt tight. He quickly looked around at the empty underground garage. There was really nothing this time. But the warning sound just now was as creepy as if someone was sticking it to his ear. Even Su Tong was startled and broke into a cold sweat. I even suspected that the voice just now was an illusion. But if you think about it carefully, it is so true. Now he looked at the brain crystal in his hand and began to murmur in his heart. Although he didn't know who it was, the sudden voice sounded more like someone was warning him. After thinking about it and looking at this brain crystal, Su Tong threw it into the prop book after thinking about it. The voice just now kept lingering in his mind, and when he thought about it, it was like a bucket of cold water being poured down on him. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong, but for the moment he couldn't grasp it and couldn't think of a clue. Anyway, the brain crystal is in your hand, you can just devour it if necessary. After sorting out his clothes, Su Tong stood up and continued walking downstairs. Walking down the ramp, he saw several vans parked in the huge basement. The logos of various courier companies are printed on the vans, and they are lined up here waiting for subcontracting. Behind the van is a huge warehouse and sorting assembly line. It is said that this is the place where Monkey made an appointment with him to work part-time. Temporary workers like them work in 4 shifts, with each shift working for 5 hours and taking an hour to rest for meals. 150 yuan a day, plus a staff meal, and the salary is paid daily. You only need to work here for 2 days, and the housewife's rent will be paid. Even though the money for such a job is not high, if you are not introduced by an acquaintance, you would not even think about joining. It's a good thing that Monkey's cousin is here to be a small supervisor, otherwise such a good thing would not be their turn. I believe that if the apocalypse hadn't happened, Sunset and Monkey would have spent the entire summer here. No one. Even in the entire sorting workshop, there is not a single infected person. This is a bit strange. The assembly line here will not be shut down 24 hours a day. There are at least 30 people here in each shift. How can there be no one? In confusion, Su Tong suddenly heard someone shouting. "Help! Help!" The sound seemed to come from the large warehouse at the back. Su Tong followed the sound and groped over. The warehouse was filled with various express boxes, but after bypassing these express boxes, a red door appeared in front of him. The faint shouts came from inside the gate. At this moment, he remembered the red gate mentioned in the Monkey text message. He raised his eyebrows. Instead of opening the door himself, he called out the fat man and controlled the little fat man. "Go and open the door." The door was not locked, all you had to do was push the door latch, and then the fat man grabbed the door handle with his hand and pulled it back hard. As the door slowly opened, Su Tong's pupils shrank and he exclaimed, "Monkey! You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 97. When they saw the door being opened, everyone had a look of horror on their faces at first, but when they saw clearly that Su Tong standing outside the door looked just like a normal person. Several people's faces suddenly became ecstatic. There is a living person, someone really came to save us. Little brother, hurry up, help us. Help me first. I am the general manager of the group. Little brother, please help me untie the rope first. Come on, when we get out, I will give you whatever money you want. Everyone was pleading, as if they were afraid that Su Tong would abandon them. The monkey on the side raised his head and looked at Su Tong Hao, with tears overflowing from his red and swollen eyes, and his face was red with excitement. Yahweh, you fool, I told you not to come. Those scorching eyes, even though it was the first time they met, still greatly touched Su Tong's heart. In an instant, countless memories flooded into his mind, clips of the monkey playing with him since he was a child. Even if it was their first meeting, it couldn't stop the excitement welling up in his heart. Little brother, hurry up, don't delay, there will be monsters coming later, help us untie it quickly. At this time, the middle-aged man trapped next to the monkey spoke and urged. When Su Tong saw it, he was stunned for a moment. Isn't this person the general manager of the company on the 28th floor? Although the man looked embarrassed at the moment, he was definitely wearing a high-end suit and a white shirt that Su Tong was familiar with. Please, hurry up and help us, the man begged in a low voice. The monkey on the side raised his head proudly. This is my brother. After saying that, he grinned at Su Tong and motioned for him to help him untie the rope. Only. Su Tong did not move forward, but took 2 steps back. Seeing his move, everyone in the room fell silent instantly, and everyone stared at Su Tong. Ziawai, help me quickly, where are you going? After the monkey was stunned for 2 seconds, he looked at Su Tong with a strange expression. However, Su Tong just silently took out his mobile phone from his pocket and pressed the call button. Beep, beep. The call was connected, and the cell phone on the other side rang slowly, but the sound of the cell phone did not come from the monkey, but from the pocket of the company boss on the other side. Suddenly the boss's face darkened, and there was no longer the frightened and anxious expression just now, and there was a cold light shining under his deep eyes. He slowly raised his head and stared at Su Tong coldly. He saw his hand slipping out from under the rope without haste, holding the phone in his hand, pressing the answer button and placing it next to his ear. When did you find out? You shouldn't tie the rope. Su Tong took another step back and called Xiaopang back to him. The moment I opened the door, I was really touched. I even had a strong impulse from the bottom of my heart to rush over and help the monkey untie the rope. But it was at this moment that he suddenly realized something was wrong. Monkey's hands were firmly tied behind his back. How could he send a text message and call himself? If you have some free time, why not untie the rope yourself? Hearing this, the boss was stunned for a moment, but soon a smile appeared on his face, and he patted the monkey on the head casually. It seems that I am getting older, but there are some things I can't always do well. Secretary Li didn't come down with you. It looks like she was killed by you. You got the brain crystal. How does it taste? Isn't it very tempting? As the man spoke, he put down the phone in his hand and inserted his palm into the monkey's head little by little. Under the agitation of the man's palm, the monkey's head's facial features also became distorted, like a ball of plasticine. Soon, a flashing fluorescent brain crystal appeared between the man's fingers. Your excellence exceeds my expectations. Join me and I can give you more brain crystals and even unparalleled power. Looking at this dazzling fluorescent brain crystal, which was about the size of an egg, Su Tong's eyelids twitched a few times, but instead of answering his words, he asked, "You seem to know a lot of things." "That's right, omniscient and omnipotent, so if you join me, you can also gain the same power as me." The man's hoarse voice seemed to be filled with some kind of special magic power, and every word seemed to be filled with endless temptation. With just one sentence, Su Tong's mind could not control the image of himself standing above countless infected people, like a god. Picture. The man tossed it casually and actually threw the shining brain crystal towards him. This is my sincerity. Come on, let me take you to the top of the world. Go and see the scenery on that top. He opened his hand towards Su Tong, and saw that there were more than 10 brain crystals shining with strange brilliance in his palm. Each one was like the top gem in the world, shining brightly in his hand. These gems are not wealth, but they hold infinite possibilities. Su Tong's eyes were blurred for a moment, but his mind suddenly remembered that empty warning, "Don't eat it." Wrong. His eyes regained clarity instantly, and he decisively activated Retributor as a faint light shield enveloped him. As the mental shield rose, the world in front of him suddenly collapsed under the filter of the shield. The body of the man holding the brain crystal twisted and shattered along with the collapsing world. Instead, there were bright red sarcomas and huge blood vessels. Countless webs of flesh and blood covered the entire huge warehouse, and a heart-like tumor almost filled up the entire warehouse. On the surface of the sarcoma, there are human faces, some male and female, some old and some young, with their eyes tightly closed, clinging to the flesh ball like a mask. Monkey. When he saw the monkey's face actually appearing among them, Su Tong clenched his hands tightly, trembling slightly, his chest heaved violently, and his eyes became more and more angry. Kick 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 kick. I saw the sarcoma squirming, and the face on the surface slowly opened its eyes. Zai, save me, I'm a monkey. Dozens of different faces, but the same voice. She looked at him longingly and continued, Zai, have you forgotten, we are good friends. Didn't you agree to save me? Why don't you save me? Come and save me. Buzz buzz buzz. At the same time, the mobile phone in his pocket kept buzzing at this moment, and text messages saying save me kept popping up. Help me, help me. As the calls came out, the faint mental shield around Su Tong began to twist, as if he was under great oppression. Shut up. Su Tong's eyes widened angrily, and his eyes seemed like deep black holes. When he finished speaking, his figure had already rushed towards the huge mass of flesh in front of him. Jumping in the air, he saw Xiaopang flying quickly at his feet. He raised his hands as a springboard and pushed Su Tong upwards in the air. You're not a monkey at all. A snake has 7 inches, a dragon has reverse scales, lime boils when it meets water, and white phosphorus ignites spontaneously when exposed to the sun. Both humans and ghosts have their own taboos and weaknesses. Su Tong was no exception. Even though he had never met Monkey, he felt a natural affinity for Monkey from the moment he received his first phone call. Within a few days of the virus outbreak, Monkey's text messages and warnings made him develop a strong impression of this boy he had grown up with. This good impression comes not only from Su Tong but also from his other identity, Yu Hui. The demonic power was activated, and blue demonic flames ignited on the blade. Chop you. The blade of the blade left a streak of blue light in mid-air and slashed down along the flesh wall of the giant tumor. Suddenly pink liquid with a strong smell of salted fish gushes out of the wound. Asshole. The huge pain caused Sarcoma's body to tremble, and those angry faces began to twist, roaring sharply at Su Tong, and forming a mental storm visible to the naked eye. Kaka kaka. Cracks burst open on the mental shield, and the huge impact knocked him away. Boom. Even though he had an amazing physique, when the huge impact hit him, Su Tong's eyes suddenly went dark, and his vision became blurred at this time. A flesh thorn that looked like a blood vessel extended from the sarcoma and stabbed him quickly. Su Tong hooked his fingers, and Xiaopang quickly flew in front of him. Boom. The little fat man's metal-like body was instantly punctured by blood vessels. Then he swung it and smashed the little fat man against the wall, causing his body to be deformed instantly. The face on the sarcoma quickly twisted and gradually formed a new face. This is exactly the face of the group boss just now, almost exactly the same as the one in the office portrait. Integrate with me and become a part of me. I smell something different in you. There are no eyeballs in the deep eye sockets, only skeletons twisting, but you can still feel the greedy gaze. From the moment Su Tong stepped into the building, he had already sensed an extraordinary aura about this little guy. It was an aura that he couldn't describe, an indescribable power that made every cell in his body tremble. After searching through all the memories that he had devoured, he finally found Yu Hui's information in the mind of a skinny guy. He wanted Secretary Li to catch him, but unexpectedly, he actually cut off contact with Secretary Li. But it doesn't matter, this little guy still brought it to his mouth. I saw another blood vessel in the sarcoma slowly detaching from the sticky flesh wall, like a spear stabbing Su Tong. Don't move. At the same time, huge mental oppression came like an overwhelming force. Just as Su Tong was about to dodge, his body felt as if it had been hit by a sledgehammer, and he couldn't even touch it with a finger. Soon enough, at the moment when the blood vessel was stabbed, slender tentacles quickly came out from the darkness, grabbed Su Tong on the ground, and quickly pulled him back. A familiar voice came. Su Tong could guess who it was without looking, and cursed, "You idiot, didn't I tell you to wait on the third floor?" The fat man who was scolded couldn't care less about this. He picked up Su Tong and ran out. But as soon as he turned around, the entrance to the passage leading back and forth was actually sealed by a thick wall of flesh. "Can you run away?" With a long cold sigh, those abyss-like eyes scanned silently, and one blood vessel after another gradually fell off from the flesh wall, and rushed towards Su Tong and the others in dense numbers. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 98. Blood vessels came in quickly, and a sarcoma formed on the head of the blood vessel. As the sarcoma squirmed, the faces gradually became clearer, and excited screams came from their mouths. "Come on, let's merge into one, feel it. Let's not differentiate between each other's happiness." A cold light flashed in Su Tong's eyes. He raised his hand and released a silver arc of electricity, but the result made his heart drop to the bottom. He saw that the electric light hit the bloody blood vessels, but it had no effect at all, and even seemed like it's like being absorbed by blood vessels. Seeing this, Su Tong quickly called out the brainstone from the prop book. Although it was suspected of being temporary, he had no better choice at this time. He cut open the blood vessel in front of him with a knife and was about to stuff the brain crystal into his mouth. However, what he didn't expect was that countless densely packed tubular strips of meat poured out of the cut blood vessels, quickly swallowing up half of the body. In just an instant, bursts of numbness quickly spread throughout his body. Warning. You have been affected by a mysterious toxin, and your entire body is temporarily reduced by 100%. Warning. You have been affected by a mysterious toxin and are temporarily unable to activate the active item ability. Warning. You have been affected by a mysterious toxin, and your body has become stiff in a large area. You are temporarily unable to use the prop card ability. The reminder sound in his ears made him frown. Not only was this damn sarcoma immune to his own lightning attacks, it actually released toxins. The numbness that came quickly was like countless weak electric currents swimming through his body, making him unable to muster any strength. As soon as he loosened his fingers, the shining silver brainstone slipped from the gap between his fingers. Sarcoma quickly lifted him up from the ground into the air. His face turned into a monkey's face, and he smiled at him with a hypocritical look on his face. "We are good brothers who grew up together. What's wrong with being with me, of?" When death was imminent, Su Tong no longer had any interest in arguing with this guy. It's just a pity that that unlucky guy will have to stay in the ward of the intensive care unit for the rest of his life. Don't even think about it. Hearing Sarcoma's disgusting nonsense, he couldn't help but sneer. Then did you hear what I just whispered to you? Whisper. The monkey's face was stunned for a moment, and he was still searching for the monkey's memory in his mind, as if he still hadn't figured out where the whisper came from. Seeing the confusion on his face, Su Tong nodded indifferently, "It's okay if you didn't hear it. After all, father's love is silent." The sarcoma monster shook his body a few times before saying, "When death is imminent, you still speak harshly." As he spoke, the rotting flesh and blood on his body twisted rapidly, and a huge crack slowly opened like an abyss swallowing all things. Inside was a thick pink liquid that exuded a fishy smell that rivaled that of canned herring. If you look closely, you will see a bone occasionally rolling up from below in these viscous liquids. Seeing this, Su Tong twitched the corner of his mouth and looked up at the sarcoma in front of him. "How about we die in a different way? I brought ketchup, salt, and pepper." Sarcoma ignored his wise words. This was the most direct and conservative way to ensure that she would get the strange power he had. Just when he was about to throw Su Tong into his belly, something that Su Tong and the sarcoma monster never expected happened. "Brother!" Along with a big fat roar, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the belly of the sarcoid monster, and fell into the viscous liquid with a plop. With a silly smile on his honest face, he waved towards him, and his body quickly sank into the viscous liquid. It turned out that the brain crystal that Su Tong had just slipped off was picked up by the big fat tentacle and swallowed directly. After devouring the brain crystals, Big Fat gained the ability to teleport, but instead of using this ability to escape, he chose to jump into the abdominal cavity of the sarcoma. "Don't." Su Tong was stunned for a moment and immediately understood what this guy was going to do. He roared and wanted to come out, but it was too late after he sank into the erosive liquid. I saw a red light flashing under the liquid, followed by a huge air wave suddenly exploding in front of Su Tong's eyes. Boom! Red ripples visible to the naked eye extended from the abdominal cavity of the sarcoma. The rotten flesh wall burst open under the ripples, and was torn into pieces with flames and air waves. The human-looking faces let out painful wails and were instantly blown to pieces in the red air waves. Su Tong was even more swept up by the air wave, and his body flew out. He didn't know what he hit. He made a hasty hook and saw the fat man on the ground quickly threw himself in front of him, blocking him. Shockwave. Pot, pot, pot. I don't know how much time passed, but when Su Tong opened his eyes again, his huge body with sarcoma had been blown into pieces, and countless pieces of broken flesh were scattered on the ground. After seeing this, he was stunned for a second, then stood up and rushed into the pile of meat, groping desperately. While groping, he cursed, "Are you a fool? I only gave you 2 bottles of Coke. Do you have to work so hard? There are plenty of Cokes out there if you want to drink them. Come out, come out. Even if you have your head left, give it to me." The viscous liquid was still warm from the explosion. He groped desperately while cursing loudly on the other side. There has never been a moment of such violence and anger. This world with a bad script gave him a brother as soon as he entered and asked him to rush over desperately to save him, but in the end it gave him the worst ending. Just when he thought this was already going to be terrible, a brother he didn't expect jumped out and gave him another mental bomb. In the rotten flesh and blood, except for the broken bones and undigested clothes, he could no longer find the fat figure, not even his head. Plop. Sitting on this pile of rotten meat, the feeling of emptiness in his heart drove him crazy. So much so that he ignored the prompts coming from the space. For the first time in his life, he felt a deep sense of indebtedness, and tried desperately to make up for it, but in the end, he was not even given a chance. He prides himself on making fun of the world, but he doesn't expect that he will be the one being teased in the end. Just when a deep feeling of powerlessness came over me, the sound of babies crying suddenly came from outside the warehouse. Wow, wow, wow. At first glance, the sound sounded very distant. But when Su Tong raised his head numbly, he found a woman holding a baby standing in a corner not far away. When he saw the woman's face clearly, Su Tong was stunned. "It's you. The woman in front of me is none other than the infected person who took away the dead baby in Tongza Tower." "No. They should be the evolvers, and the first batch of evolvers, much longer than the frog-faced man." Just when he was wondering why this woman appeared here, I saw the woman stretching out her slender index finger and thumb, and the nails of the two fingers quickly extended, and then she fiddled with the pile of rotten meat in front of her for a few times. A brain crystal the size of a baby's fist was picked out by the woman from the rotten meat. After getting the brain crystal, the woman actually wanted to eat it. Hey, it's too much to blatantly take advantage of someone like this. Seeing that the woman was about to swallow the brain crystals, Su Tong's expression turned cold and he stood up silently. When the woman heard the words, her dark green pupils looked at him. "Deal, I can help you, and you have to help me too." Kong Yu's voice immediately made goosebumps stand up all over his body. He immediately realized that the voice that prevented him from swallowing the brain crystals came from the evolver in front of him. But he immediately realized something else: the baby. He remembered clearly that the baby had died. His face was purple and swollen at the time, and he had been dead for at least half an hour. That's why he decisively gave up treatment. However, when he looked at the surveillance camera, he found that when she picked up the baby's arms actually lifted up. At that time, he once doubted whether the baby was dead. Now hearing the baby cry, the answer has been revealed. The transaction mentioned by the woman at this time made him think of a possibility. "Is there any way you can resurrect my friend?" Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly became eager. The woman shook her head and showed the baby in her arms to Su Tong. He came closer to take a look and found that although the baby looked just like a living person, a layer of blood-red sarcoma had developed on its body. Apparently it was not resurrected, but merely alive in another form. Su Tong suddenly had a look of disappointment on his face. He thought that this woman had the ability to resurrect the big fat man, but he didn't expect that she didn't. But just when he was disappointed, the woman pointed to the damaged little fat man in the corner and said, "But I can let his mind parasitize in that paper man." As she spoke, her slender fingernails plucked a few times at the rotten flesh at Su Tong's feet. She raised her little finger and a dark red brain crystal was hooked on her fingernail. He looked at Su Tong with dark green eyes and shook the large pink brain crystal in his hand. "Are you willing to do this deal?" Su Tong looked at the damaged little fat man in the corner, and then at the dark red crystal stone. His black and white eyes flickered for a few times, and he patted his thigh. "It's done." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 99. Are you sure this method works? In the maintenance department on the third floor, Su Tong placed the repaired Pang Pang on the table. I saw that Xiaopang's body was full of patches. It wasn't that he didn't want to repair it completely, but he really couldn't afford it. Before I entered the world of scripts, I only had more than 300 script points, and when I killed the Schizophora woman, I consumed 40% of them. Now he only has about 200 script points left. With just this few script points, it may not be possible to repair Xiaopang completely, so we can only make simple repairs based on the principle of saving what we can. If we can leave the script world alive, we will have the script points by then. Be sure to do a comprehensive maintenance for the little fat one. The woman did not answer his question, but threw the child into his arms and placed the fat brain crystal on the head of the paper man. Opening her palm, wisps of dark green energy gathered in the woman's palm. At the same time, he also received a prompt from space. Your creation paper fat man has been invaded by a mysterious force. Accepting this power may cause uncontrollable changes in your creation. This change is permanent and irreversible. Do you accept it? Warning, your creation paper fat man itself has mysterious properties. Once it is modified, it may lead to unpredictable consequences. Please consider it carefully. After hearing the reminder from the space, Su Tong didn't think anything else and decisively chose to accept it. After he chose to accept it, the fluorescence in the woman's palm became stronger and stronger, and the brain crystal on the fat man's head actually began to make a cracking sound under the cover of fluorescence. Seeing this, Su Tong held the baby's hand and clenched his fist tightly. Boom! Suddenly, the brain crystals shattered and turned into countless powders in the fluorescence, and seeped into Fatty's body. Soon a mysterious and strange character began to be outlined above the fat man's head. He opened his eyes wide and looked, and the result, ahem, he still had to study. The characters are like characters, and the surroundings are imprinted in a composite frame, like the alchemy diagram on the cartoon steel, but it is simpler than that. When the fluorescence on the woman's hand gradually faded, Su Tong returned the child in his arms to the woman, and quickly picked up the fat man and took a closer look. The paper fat man was still the same paper fat man, and he didn't seem to be alive as he imagined. Seeing this, he couldn't help but look at the woman suspiciously, meaning you'd better give me an explanation. The woman held the child and shook it gently a few times. When she saw the look he cast, she explained, "This paper doll has a very mysterious power. This power does not conflict with my powers, but the combination of the two, but it gave me a very weird feeling in the end. You need to understand the details yourself." The woman's meaning was very simple, translated into what doctors often say, "I have tried my best, and the operation was successful. The rest depends on whether he can bear it." Su Tong was helpless now and could only reluctantly nod and accept the result. "I tried to put the fat man into the prop book, but the prop book refused to accept it. This item is in a special stage and cannot be included in the prop book. Well, now my wish to use the prop book to find out about Fatty's situation was in vain." But when he called out the props book, he took a look at the last message left in the props book. "Identity mission, finding partners completed. You have completed the identity task. As the second person in this script to complete the identity task, you have received a special reward. Please check it. Special reward." When he saw these 4 words in a depressed mood, he felt like he was given a boost of excitement. He glanced at the prop book and started looking for it. No way, there are too many things in the prop book. He could only search at a glance. While scanning the prop book, he did not forget to say to the woman in front of him, "Then the deal is over, we should also talk about the main topic. What should I call you? Evolved? Infected?" The woman sat on the chair, teasing the baby on her hand from time to time. When she heard Su Tong's question, the woman simply said 2 words, "Yan Niang." "Yan Niang? This name is quite special. Then what do you mean by following me?" Su Tong sat on the sofa on the other side, looking at the next page of the props book. He wanted to light a cigar for himself, but thought that there was a baby there, so he gave up the idea. Regardless of this, he is a baby, but he still has a basic sense of public morality. Yan Niang cherishes words like gold, and there are still 2 words, kill you. Hearing this, Su Tong nodded disapprovingly. "What now?" "I've changed my mind, but you have to escort me west." Yan Niang finally raised her head and said calmly. It seemed that she had received a strong improvement after eating the sarcoma's brain crystal, and her face began to regain the color of a living person. Even the half-eaten head had regenerated flesh and blood, although it was still bald. Bald. But this also gave her face a look of lack of confidence that only a living person can have. As soon as she finished speaking, Su Tong heard a prompt from the space in his ears. "You triggered the special plot mission 1, all the way to the west. Mission objective, protect Yan Niang as she heads west. Mission description, be careful, when you accept this mission, your position is no longer the human camp, but at the same time you are the enemy of countless infected and evolved people. Warning, Special plot missions will change the direction of your main mission. You can choose to accept/reject. West Side. Su Tong scratched his head and remembered that the ranger had said that his identity mission was to go eastward, and that there might be a place where all the players would gather. To be honest, I should go eastward. The difficulty of scripts in this doomsday setting is no longer extremely high. Personal strength, even for a guy like Yang Zixuan, is nothing more than a speck of dust here. If you want to survive, it seems that you should choose unity. Moreover, there happens to be a map on the wall. The place where they are now is still a third-tier city. The more developed the city is as you go west, the denser the population will be. It is conceivable that what he will face at that time may not be as simple as a sarcoma. Why didn't you let me eat that brain crystal? You should know that if I had eaten that brain crystal, Fatty might not have died. He neither promised Yan Niang nor rejected her, but chose another question. This is a little negotiation trick. Before getting the answer you want, the other party will often give the most reasonable answer to a sudden question to increase the other party's conditions for agreeing to you. If the answer to this question is not good enough, then you also have a reason to reject the other person's previous question. This is not a clever trick, but it is definitely the most practical. I believe anyone who has worked on a construction site will have a deep understanding of it. Sure enough, Yan Niang seemed to think about it seriously before explaining. Eating a large amount of brain crystals, or different types of brain crystals, in a short period of time will not do you any good. It will not only weaken the effects that brain crystals bring to you. If it increases, there will be serious sequelae. Sequelae. When he heard these three words, he slowly sat up straight. His expression had to become serious, because he knew all too well the pain caused by the sequelae. Just at this moment, his hands were still shaking, and the clothes on his back were soaked with cold sweat. It is the curse effect brought by Retributor. Fortunately, my current physique has increased by 80%, so I can sit here and chat with Yan Niang like this. If it were in the previous script world, I would have been eager to throw myself next to the bonfire at this moment, shivering like an old dog. Let alone chatting, I'm afraid it's not easy to talk. Yan Niang looked at the unrepaired mobile phones on the table, picked them up one after another and stacked them together, like stacking building blocks. Power is like building blocks. If you make a wrong step, it will be difficult to make up the gaps left behind. Then the faster you build them, the thinner the foundation becomes. When you exceed the critical point and can no longer control these powers. Wow! The phone fell to the ground in a mess. Even though Yan Niang didn't tell the outcome, such a vivid metaphor already described the ending very clearly. Sure enough, there is no free lunch in the world, and all forces still follow the principle of equal exchange. Understanding the reason, Su Tong took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and recalled every detail of this mission in his mind. Time passed by minute, and Yan Niang did not rush. He was even prepared to be rejected. Being with her was a choice that was destined to make him an enemy of humans and infected people, and even make him an enemy of the entire world. Anyone with any brain would choose to refuse. About 5 minutes later, he opened his eyelids, and there was a bit of madness and heat shining under his clear pupils. In 5 minutes, he replayed everything he had experienced in his mind. The death of the monkey, the sacrifice of Big Fat. It seems to be a predetermined result, and it seems like an arrangement of fate, just like his name, Yahweh. The afterglow of the doomsday, a name destined to be full of tragedy, is the script of his world. But if this is his script, then he wants to say, no. I accept. His voice was soft, but firmer than ever. What? Yan Niang was stunned for a moment, but she didn't expect that Su Tong would choose to accept it. He raised his head, with a ferocious cold light flashing in his eyes, like a wild wolf that had been released from its cage and unchained. I accept, he reiterated. If his name is the script this time, Then why not tear up and rewrite a script full of tragedy? Even if he is the enemy of the whole world, he must choose to say no to fate once. That power. Even if the final result is that the body is torn into pieces and died without a burial place, he is willing to do so. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 101. Rumble. The deafening footsteps echoed over the city. It was accompanied by bursts of stench. In such a hot day, aren't these infected people afraid of rotting away? On the roof of the postal building, Su Tong held a telescope and looked at the mighty army of infected people downstairs. From this angle, the familiar scene may be the closest he has ever been to a monkey. I saw that his attire at this moment had completely changed. He was wearing a dark gray camouflage uniform, shiny big leather boots, and a dagger on his waist. He bought this set of clothes from the department store opposite. Yes, he bought it for 0 yuan, but no one was grabbing it. Apart from a few infected people, there were only a few rats in the building. After he easily killed them, the building became his last supply station before setting off. Standing on the top of the building, I saw that there were still some evolved people in the huge army of infected people. These evolved beings have completely lost their human form, retaining only a few human characteristics. Some even have only one face, but their body has turned into a huge lizard. As they walk, they don't forget to take a bite of gaba gaba from the army of infected people around them. In addition, there is also a thing with the same body shape as the Hulk, but it has 3 heads and its arms have turned into the shape of a big snake. Looking through the telescope, my dear, it is like a bunch of demons dancing around. Such a large army was moving toward the west in a mighty manner, and he had to hide on the building to avoid the sharp attack. After all, even if he got a reward of 800 script points, he couldn't afford to spend it like this. But having said that, I am the second person to complete the identity mission. Who is the first? Ranger. Not quite, the identity mission seems to be more difficult than they thought. After all, these 800 script points are really not that easy to get, and I have risked my life. I believe that others will never have it easy either. But no matter who is able to complete the identity mission first, one can imagine his strength. It's a pity that my current task is to protect Yan Niang all the way to the west. I'm afraid I won't have the chance to meet such a master in a short time. The west. Something is calling us over there. The sun was setting in the distance, and Yan Niang's dark green pupils were flashing with light, but she didn't know what she was thinking at the moment. After standing on the building for a long time, until the massive army of infected people completely disappeared from their sight, Su Tong bent down and carried the bag containing the fat man, and waved his hand. Let's go. Zhizzy. Why did you stop here? The car door opened, and the ranger stepped out of the car with a depressed face. Looking at the dark world in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. The journey was considered safe and sound. Even so, the black pickup truck was still covered with blood-stained scratches, and the front of the truck had been cratered. Fortunately, domestic cars are strong enough. If it were a Japanese car, they would have been doomed. But every time I think about it, I still feel frightened, especially yesterday. If he hadn't discovered it in time and noticed the mighty army of infected people in the distance early, I'm afraid that the 4 people in their car wouldn't be enough for each of them to take a lick. Aunt Wang walked out of the car carrying the tool bag and quickly checked the 4 wheels of the car. After seeing that the left wheel was almost scrapped, she quickly took out the spare tire and started replacing it, as if this kind of thing was already a familiar task for Aunt Wang. Under the night sky, she couldn't see her surroundings, but she didn't need any special tools, so she removed the broken tire by fumbling. Clatter. The ranger casually lit a cigarette and put it into his mouth and took a deep breath. White smoke poured out of his nose. "Uncle, I'm hungry." At this time, Zhang Qiang, who was sitting in the back seat of the car, lowered the window and looked at the ranger and said cautiously, "You kid, you work all day long, why can't you have enough to eat?" The ranger reached out and rubbed the kid's head a few times, took out a ham and handed it to him. He glanced at Xiao Chenzi, who was still sleeping in the car, from the corner of his eye. Compared to Zhang Qiang, this child spends 24 hours a day and wishes he could sleep half of the time. "Occasionally I would wake up and take some medicine and food, or go to the toilet, and then lie down and fall asleep again not long after I came back." Aunt Wang was also very surprised about this. Although the child Chenzi was a bit sleepy in the past, he was not so sleepy. It seemed that during this period, his sleeping time was getting longer and longer. "I don't know if it's the medicine or the worsening of his condition. But it saves trouble for the ranger." "Thank you, uncle." Zhang Qiang was holding the ham in his arms and was about to eat it when he suddenly froze for a moment. His eyes looked at the flickering green light in the woods in the distance, flickering like the eyes of a beast. He shook his head left and right. With a swing, he swayed towards them and rushed towards them. "Woo!" Zhang Qiang covered his mouth with one hand, and at the same time stretched his hand out of the car window to pull the ranger beside him. "Why, one stick isn't enough." The ranger turned around impatiently, but when he saw Zhang Qiang's fearful eyes, his heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he quickly raised his head and looked ahead. When he saw the dim light flickering in the woods across the road, the ranger's pupils tightened and he took a breath of cold air into his lungs. "Damn it, hurry up, get in the car and run." When Aunt Wang heard the shouting, she hurriedly raised her head, but in front of her eyes was the wheel that had just been removed, and she hadn't had time to put the spare tire on. She didn't come early, she didn't come late, but she just happened to be here at this point. Seeing that the spare tire hadn't even been installed yet, the ranger's expression turned frighteningly sinister. Just when he was about to tell them to abandon the car and run for their lives, a sharp scream was heard in the woods. A pair of dark green lights flashed left and right in the dark forest, leaving a green fluorescence in the air. When the ranger saw the other party's figure clearly, the distance between the two no longer allowed him to think anymore. "Evolver!" The ranger's heart tightened and he quickly raised his slingshot, but the speed of this evolver far exceeded his expectations. With a kick of his thick legs, his figure was so fast that it was difficult to catch it with the naked eye. He flew up like a hunting falcon. Dark red flames ignited on his arms, and the fire suddenly illuminated the night. When it lights up, the plants within a 3-meter radius are instantly ignited. The evolver swooped down and ignored the short 10-meter distance as if he was just stepping through a ditch. Get out of the car quickly." Seeing the fireball swooping down from mid-air, the ranger originally wanted to dodge, but when he thought that there were 2 children behind him, he stamped his feet, yelled at Aunt Wang, and bravely rushed forward. "Man of steel!" The ranger's arms and face were quickly attached to a layer of metal. At the same time, countless sharp barbs were split into his palms. He raised his fists high and grabbed the arm of the evolver in front of him. But what he never expected was that when he stretched out his hand to grab it, flames exploded in front of his eyes, and a skinny but as big hand as a basin stretched out his arm in the exploding firelight. Kuizun punched him directly in the abdomen. Boom! In an instant, the ranger's abdomen was deeply dented, his eyes protruded from his sockets, and the pain almost made him suffocate. He originally thought that the opponent was only good at speed and flames, but he didn't expect that when the firelight dispersed, the body under the light and shadow turned out to be as tall as a giant. Suddenly, the ranger's body hit the car below like a cannonball, causing the entire car to shake. The tires on both sides were raised high, and it almost looked like it was about to roll over. The ranger desperately wanted to take a breath, but the monster in front of him didn't give him this chance at all. The figure fell from the air and hit his head with a huge fist. At the critical moment, The ranger hurriedly threw the flickering dagger, barely dodging before the huge fist fell. A single punch fell like a cannonball, and the 2-ton pickup truck was suddenly pushed sideways. The wheels were spinning and rubbing on the ground, making a terrible sound, just like an unwilling subdued beast making a weak roar. Then it hit the curb on the side of the road, flipped somersault mid-air, and then hit the ground heavily. The body of the car was almost falling apart, and a pungent smell of gasoline filled the air. Fortunately, Aunt Wang hurriedly pulled the 2 children out of the car under the reminder of the ranger, otherwise the consequences would be disastrous. But the situation is no better. The giant-like evolver turned his eyes and saw the 2 children in Aunt Wang's hands. His eyes with flashing green light quickly locked on Xiao Chenzi, who had woken up. "Stretch out your palm to grab him. Get away." Seeing that huge palm grabbing at her, Aunt Wang raised the barbell and threw it at her. With the barbell weighing nearly 40 kilograms and Aunt Wang's terrifying arm strength, an infected person would die if touched, or crippled if scratched. The evolver just slapped her with his backhand, and the barbell in Aunt Wang's hand flew directly out. The terrifying force caused her jaw to burst open, and her body was carried away by this huge force. "Beast, this way." The ranger who had just dodged the giant's killing punch in the darkness rushed forward. He raised his hand, and a dazzling laser beam exploded from his hand, shooting straight into its eyes. Suddenly, the eyes of the evolved man were completely blank, and he could not see anything clearly. But he didn't seem to be completely dependent on these eyes. While losing vision, a single eye opened on his chest and stared at the mad dog-like guy in front of him. He punched out instinctively, and at the same time, blazing flames exploded on his fist. But the ranger chose to take a few steps back at this moment. After skillfully dodging the punch, he came closer again and a prop card was activated by him. That was the ultimate move storm attack that he refused to use easily. He suddenly stepped forward, his hands hanging casually on both sides of his body, and black light erupted from them. His fists struck out like the wind, quickly hitting the chest, lower abdomen, lower body, and joints of both legs of the evolver. With each attack, a dazzling electric arc exploded on his fist, and the speed became faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, there were countless after-images, and the giant let out a cold snort of pain, but such an attack was not fatal enough for him. After a violent storm of attacks, when the ranger landed his last punch, countless starlight points flickered at the location where he had just attacked, and then boom, these flashes of light suddenly connected into one, bursting out with huge energy. At this time, the evolver's body exploded into countless pieces of flesh, a muffled scream came from his mouth, and he fell heavily to the ground. Seeing this, the ranger had quick eyes and quick hands. He took out a long knife in his hand and slashed it at the giant's throat. The lightning-quick sword fell down, and the basin-sized head fell heavily to the ground. Bah! If a tiger doesn't show off its power, it thinks I'm a sick cat. Looking at the beheaded giant, he spat coldly, turned around and pulled up Aunt Wang who was on the ground and said, "Take them 2 away first, I'll do it." Before these 2 words were spoken, Aunt Wang's face changed and she pushed him away. A big hand came out of the darkness, grabbed Aunt Wang's shoulder and squeezed it hard. Click. The 2 children hiding behind Aunt Wang couldn't help but scream. They saw that Aunt Wang's left shoulder was crushed and torn open, and hot blood splashed in the air. I saw that the giant whose head had been chopped off actually stood up again, and the huge one eye on his chest was locked on the 2 children. But before he could take action, Aunt Wang grabbed the evolver's arm with her right hand, and her body suddenly stick it on. He used a judo twist to grab the opponent's arm and pounced forward. Suddenly, the 2 figures hit the overturned car on the side. The ranger rushed up to help, but at this moment, a scene that frightened him appeared. In the woods in the distance, 3 more pairs of green pupils appeared. They were far away from each other, but every time the twinkling eyes appeared, the distance got much closer. "Take them away." Aunt Wang shouted with all her strength. She knew in her heart that she, a disabled person, could not walk far without a car and would only be a burden. In her entire life, the last thing she wanted was for others to treat her as a burden. Even if she lost her career, her aura of glory, or even a leg, this self-esteem was the bottom line she adhered to. The ranger hesitated for a moment, glanced at the gasoline flowing out of the ground, and knew exactly what Aunt Wang was going to do. Without hesitation, he picked up the two children and ran towards the jungle on the other side. The evolver, who was pinned down by Aunt Wang, saw his target leaving and began to struggle desperately, but he obviously ignored Aunt Wang's strength. Even with only one hand able to move, relying on the advantages brought by the twisting skills and weight, even the evolution with amazing strength was unable to break free for a while. Boom! A fist hit Aunt Wang hard on the forehead, instantly cracking her eye socket. Then the second punch came down, and the entire eyeball was about to be blown out. As the fists came down one after another, Aunt Wang's consciousness began to blur a little, and her other eye glanced at the gold medal that fell out of her chest. Pictures of how he used his own power to shock the audience flashed through his mind that year. Urged by an unknown force, his left hand, which had lost all strength, took out the lighter from his pocket. He used all the strength of his fingers, just like he had done the 195 kilogram clean and jerk, and pressed the button of the lighter. Button. Champion. The cry full of power disappeared into this world with a roar. Chapter 21 has been significantly modified. If you find that there are no modifications, just click on the directory and re-download it. Sorry, this is a pot of water. You must learn from the lesson in the future and spend more time thinking about it. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shuigan Xiao. Chapter 102. Zi, Sister Zhao, are you ready over there? Ready, me, Xiaotong, Nai Bing and the three of us here. That's good. The 7 of us here are ready. Remember to follow the route I gave you. We can only wait for you for 10 minutes. After this time, we will set off. 10 minutes. Zhao Ya listened to the voice on the intercom and estimated the distance in her mind. They were hiding on the 3rd floor. It would take at least 2 minutes for the 3 of them to lie down together. In other words, they only have 8 minutes left to cross a main road and an alley to reach their destination. This is by no means an easy challenge. But, why can't we cross over the overpass? I remember that there is an overpass just 50 meters ahead. There is no need to walk through the alley. Nai Bing, who was beside Zhao Ya, took the walkie-talkie and asked. No. The other end of the intercom decisively rejected Nai Bing's proposal. There are some infected people under the overpass. If you disturb them when you run over, everyone will be dead. We can't afford such a risk. Although Nai Bing was a little unconvinced when he heard this, he had no reason to refuse. Okay. We are ready to go now. Zhao Ya put down the walkie-talkie, carried the package beside her, and put the sheets that had been prepared along the window. Sister Zhao, are these people really trustworthy? Xiaotong was slightly worried. After all, they had never even seen these people. Only the day before yesterday, when a drone flew over and dropped a walkie-talkie and some food, did they know that there was a group of survivors like them. Through chatting, they learned that they had found a heavy-duty truck and were preparing to rush out of the city while the infected were resting at noon. The other party asked them if they wanted to go together, and this was the scene just now. There is no other way. How long can we 3 girls hide here? We will die sooner or later. I don't think they are bad people. Otherwise, why take such risks to help us? Sister Zhao tied the sheets as she spoke, looked at them and said, you two don't have to leave, but I must leave. Seeing this, Xiaotong and Nai Bing looked at each other. Although they were still a little scared, they felt that Sister Zhao's words were correct, so they stopped talking nonsense and followed Sister Zhao to climb down. After the three people landed on the ground, they saw a drone appearing not far above their heads, and a man's voice came from the intercom, "Hurry, time is running out." Hearing the three women running towards the road ahead, Nai Bing's face suddenly turned pale when he saw the shadows shaking in the shadows. "Don't look. Go quickly." Seeing Nai Bing hesitate at her feet, Xiao Tong grabbed her arm. At this point, taking a step back would mean death, so she had no choice but to run forward. After crossing the road and looking at the slightly dim alley in front of them, the three women slowed down. Looking at the dark corners in the alley, an inexplicable sense of fear came over them. "Quick, there are 3 minutes left, hurry up." The urging voice from the intercom made the three women regain their courage. Sister Zhao gritted her teeth and said, "Fight." With rapid breathing, this dim alley was extended indefinitely at this moment. Sister Zhao felt as if her feet were filled with lead. She ran with all her strength, but she couldn't run fast. The light at the end of the alley became brighter and brighter, and the light of hope gradually burned in the brown eyes. "Hurry! Hurry up! It's right in front, hurry!" In her trance, she seemed to have heard the sound of the truck starting. "Hurry up!" Running with all her strength, the figure gradually passed through the dazzling eyes, but just as Sister Zhao's hopeful eyes were searching for the trace of the big truck, the scene in front of him made the hope in his eyes instantly crushed to pieces. There was no truck, no rescue, just dense crowds of infected people standing at the entrance to the underground garage not far in front of her. These infected people seemed to have noticed Sister Zhao and the others, shaking their bodies and turning around slowly. "It sizes, Sister Zhao, I'm sorry, we have been trapped for 4 days. There are only 3 of you, and we have 7. The man's guilty voice came from the intercom, which made Sister Zhao feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. "You, what do you mean, bastard, you are talking?" Xiao Tong snatched the walkie-talkie from Sister Zhao's pocket, pressed the walkie-talkie and shouted desperately, but no matter how she shouted, there was no response. Seeing no one responded, she looked up at the drone above her head, smashed the walkie-talkie in her hand and roared, These beasts, don't deserve a good death." The drone hung in the air, swayed slightly, dodged the walkie-talkie she threw, and then quickly disappeared from their sight. At this time, the infected person standing in front of the garage began to walk towards them, their swaying steps getting faster and faster, and their excited screams made them feel like they were falling into an ice cave. "Run!" When Xiao Tong and Sister Zhao saw this, they turned around and ran behind them in panic. Nai Bing's face instantly turned pale. He wanted to run but found that he didn't even have the strength to move his legs. The strong stench rushed towards him, and Nai Bing did not even dodge. His figure was instantly thrown to the ground by the infected person who rushed forward. Hearing Nai Bing's screams behind them, neither Sister Zhao nor Xiao Tong dared to stop, and they didn't even have the courage to look back. The faint roar of cars sounded from behind. A fully loaded SUV rushed out of the garage, knocked away the few infected people left in front of the basement, quickly rushed onto the road, and drove quickly into the distance. The sound of the car honking further and further away made Sister Zhao feel like her heart was on fire. She hated how she could trust others so easily, and she would always remember the sound in her heart. Even if she died, she would turn into one of these bloodthirsty monsters. "I will find this despicable guy one day." Ah! At this time, Xiao Tong's feet suddenly became empty, and her body fell out involuntarily. After rolling on the ground a few times, she struggled to get up. "Sister Zhao." Xiao Tong stretched out her hand, hoping that Sister Zhao could give her a hand, but Sister Zhao did not look back, and she did not even stop walking. She could only vaguely hear her hoarse apology, "I'm sorry." Xiao Tong looked blank for a moment, with a bitter smile on her face. When she turned around, she saw a bloody mouth biting down on her. "Kaka kaka." The sound of biting gradually covered the screams. Zhao Ya could only run, just run. Zhao Ya suddenly discovered that the infected people chasing her behind her had disappeared, which made her sigh in relief. He squatted down, covered his face, and sobbed softly, I'm sorry, don't blame me. If you want to blame, blame those bastards. They lied to us. Perhaps because she finally remembered her current situation, Zhao Ya quickly stood up and wiped her tears. She stood up and wanted to rush back to her original hiding place. However, as soon as she stood up, a slender silver thread was put around her neck. Then the thread tightened, and a huge force instantly dragged her up from the ground. Only then did Zhao Ye realize that there was a piece of paper above her head. Huge spider web. Hey hey hey. The slender thighs poked out from the corner. Zhao Ya turned her head with difficulty, her face instantly turning pale. I saw an evolver slowly crawling out from the huge spider web. Her face was so dark and skinny that her true appearance could no longer be seen. The clothes on her body were damaged, and there was a large mass of sarcoma on the back of her body, which looked like a spider's. Same as the abdomen. No. Please, don't. Zhao Ya twisted her body and struggled desperately. Spider-Woman seemed to be very satisfied with Zhao Ya's plump body. She threw her body next to her and made a rustling sound in her mouth. Only then did Zhao Ya realize that there was a sharp mouthpart growing out of Spider-Woman's mouth. Zhao Ya almost fainted when she saw this. Crack. Suddenly, a flash of light lit up in front of their eyes, making Spider-Woman and Zhao Ya stunned at the same time. Looking back, a man appeared in front of them at some point, holding a camera in one hand and waving his hand. Hey, a little to the left, turn your face, put your chin and look here. Click. The flash of the camera flashed, causing Spider-Woman to duck to the side subconsciously. Then she seemed to realize something, screamed angrily, raised her claws, and let out a low roar at the man. Yes, that's it, hurry up and get closer to her arms. Seeing this, instead of being afraid, the man excitedly raised his camera and at the same time directed the woman to lean into Spider-Woman's arms. Are you sick? Zhao Ya couldn't help but curse when she saw this, and the Spider-Woman beside her opened her mouth and spat out a black venomous stinger at the man. The stinger was filled with a strong stench, and it was obviously extremely poisonous. However, the man's movements seemed to be faster than the stinger. He put down the camera, and suddenly a dagger appeared in his hand, just like playing table tennis. Likewise, with a backhand move, the stinger was reflected back and pierced directly into Spider-Woman's chest. Ah! A painful cry came from Spider-Woman's mouth. At the same time, the man raised his hidden hat, his eyes flashed with a needle-like sharpness, and a big knife appeared in his hand out of thin air. Da-da-da. The sound of rapid and brisk footsteps echoed around, and the distance of 5 or 6 meters seemed to have never existed at all. Zhao Ya didn't even see what happened clearly, she only saw a big knife slashing in front of her. Puff. Instantly, the smelly blood splashed on her face, and she felt as if something fell into her arms. She opened her eyes with force and saw that it was Spider-Woman's head. For a moment, Zhao Ya's head buzzed, and she stared at the head in a daze, completely dumbfounded. Crack. It wasn't until the flash of light suddenly flashed in front of her eyes that Zhao Ya seemed to wake up and screamed and threw the head out of her hands. In panic, a hand suddenly pinched her chin. I saw a smile gradually appearing on the face of the man in the shadow. This shooting was great. Before she could understand what this man meant, a photo was placed in her hand. In the photo, he was sitting on a spider web, holding a head in his hand. Behind him was Spider-Woman's headless body, spewing dark red blood like a fountain. The weird scene was as weird as if she had taken off Spider-Woman's head with her own hands. When she came to her senses, the man had disappeared. She was left alone, staring blankly at this photo. As she looked at it, Zhao Ya suddenly felt a warm current running along her thighs. She, P'd. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Ganxiao. Chapter 103. Only rustling sounds were heard in the woods. From time to time, I heard a strange friction sound inside, and if I looked carefully, I could see flashing lights. After about a while, Su Tong walked out with a satisfied expression on his face. Sitting on the bench, he casually threw 2 brain crystals to Yan Niang beside him. Then he began to admire the photos in his hands. In a strong Gothic style, the faces of the 2 evolvers were smeared with thick lipstick. The expressions of friction between them make people feel absurd and weird. It just so happened that Su Tong was so absorbed in taking such photos that I really didn't know what to say about him. You've changed a lot lately. Yan Niang dropped a brain crystal into her mouth, raised her wrist, cut a long slit on her wrist with her fingernails, placed it near the baby's mouth, and let it lick it. Is it big? Su Tong stared at the photo and just responded casually, maybe this is what he really looks like. The good baby before was mostly due to Yu Hui's status and a large number of memory fragments, which made him unknowingly start to follow the planned direction of the script. Until he figured out the meaning of the name Yunghui, the image he maintained collapsed in an instant. He is not Yunghui, and he does not want to follow the direction given to him by the script. Can he even imagine, through this name, that he is facing the sun under a river sunset scenery, with the bright red light radiating on his skin, making every pore in his body sparkle with gleaming brilliance? Before facing the tens of thousands of corpses ahead, he led everyone around him to launch a final charge. The picture is very tragic, as magnificent as the murals of the Crusades on the church. But just like his name, people only care about the brilliance under the afterglow of the sun, but ignore the suffocating darkness that follows this light. This is definitely not the result he wants. As he said before, if this is his script, then I would tear it up without hesitation and throw it in the trash. So, with Yu Hui dead, Su Tong gave himself a new name, Uni. Going in the opposite direction, I neither intend to be a good person nor a bad person. I am going to be a rebel in this broken world. Looking at the sky getting dark gradually, Su Tong carried his luggage and planned to place Yan Niang in a safer building nearby. And he needs to hunt down evolvers with abilities similar to his as soon as possible, so as to quickly improve his abilities in a short period of time. The reason why I have such anxiety is not without reason, but because of that damn countdown, I don't know when it will appear above my head. This time, it is 24 hours. Judging from the previous 2 events, Su Tong deduced that this countdown seemed to remind them that it was time for these infected people to evolve and that they should prepare as soon as possible. Remember, try your best to hunt down those evolvers with lightning abilities. If you can, kill other evolvers. If you can't, just ignore them. After Yan Niang finished speaking, she pointed in the direction of the amusement park in the distance and warned, that amusement park is very evil. If you can't help it, don't go there. Su Tong tilted his neck, his eyes flashed with curiosity, and asked, how evil is it? Yan Niang was startled, then giggled, if you have the courage, just go, but if you can't come back, don't let me save you. Ah! Su Tong curled his lips, turned around and walked out of the room. Seeing Su Tong leave, the smile on Yan Niang's face subsided. She walked to the window, held the baby in her arms, pinched the little guy's nose with one hand, and said in a half-joking, half-serious voice, go. Come on, don't let him find you, if he wants to escape, you just, eat him. When she finished speaking, a cold look appeared in Yan Niang's eyes. After saying that, he casually threw the little guy in his hand downstairs, and saw that the little guy actually sprouted a pair of wings in mid-air, like an eagle, flapped twice and quickly flew into the sky. However, as soon as Yan Niang threw the child out, she turned around, and the smile on her face suddenly froze. She saw that the door opened at some point, and Su Tong was sticking his head out to look at her. Looking at the figure walking out downstairs, he turned out to be an infected person wearing Su Tong's clothes. Suddenly, Yan Niang's expression flickered, just like when you say bad things behind someone's back, only to realize that they are sitting next to you. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. "Sorry, I should have knocked." Su Tong casually put the backpack behind him on the ground. "This bag is too heavy, it's better to put it here first." After saying that, he took his head back and closed the door. Looking at Su Tong leaving again, Yan Niang's mouth twitched a few times, but before she could relax, the door was pushed open by Su Tong again. He stuck his head out, grinned and showed his neat white teeth, and smiled at her. "Well, you have to monitor me anyway, why not be more upright and help me explore the way?" "Okay, okay." Even though she was reluctant, Su Tong made it clear, so how could she refuse? She could only cut open her wrist, pull out a piece of bone from under the flesh and throw it to him. Then he did not forget to give a serious warning: "It is just a child and its fighting ability is very poor. If it is not necessary, don't let it join the battle." "Okay." Su Tong nodded and assured her solemnly. Then he picked up the bones and took a look. He saw a few small holes on the bones, which looked like bone flutes. He immediately waved to Yan Niang, closed the door and danced briskly. Walked down the building in small steps. Then, "Take off." Su Tong was seen grabbing the little guy's thigh with one hand, and slapped the little guy's plump butt hard with the other hand. Amidst the screams of the little guy, he flapped his wings desperately and led him. He rushed into the sky and quickly disappeared from Yan Niang's sight. "This bastard." Seeing Su Tong's disappearing figure, Yan Niang regretted it for a moment. The world is darker after nightfall. This city that has lost its electrical energy has lost its bright lights in the past. Except for the weak signal lights flashing on a few high-rise buildings, there are only a handful of light sources in the city. A pair of dark green eyes the size of a flashlight flashed out in the darkness. The emotions contained in those eyes were vicious, cruel, ruthless, and cold. It was an evolver. His jet-black hair shone with oil, and his limbs turned into sharp claws like wild beasts. He walked silently. When he passed by, the extinguished street lights on the street would light up, as if they were lighting up the street specifically for him. If you look carefully, it is not difficult to find that whenever he sets his feet, there will always be wisps of tiny electric light flashing on the ground. The corners of his mouth were still covered with fresh blood, as if he had just had a hearty meal not long ago. At this moment, he was like a king, walking around in the steel jungle, leaving deep scratches on the wall from time to time to show other infected people that this place belonged to him. When passing by a clothing store, he couldn't help but raise his head and look at the models in the showcase with his deep eyes. Occasionally, some memories of his time as a human flashed through his mind. These confusing memories made him shake his head in displeasure. When he was about to leave, he suddenly looked startled, took 2 steps back, and looked suspiciously at the male model wearing a leather jacket in the showcase. The body suddenly stood up, and the face slowly came close to the glass, with a thin face imprinted in the dark green pupils. Just when he became more and more suspicious, the face suddenly turned around and said, "Hey, you found it?" 2 pairs of clear black and white eyes flashed with a ferocious cold light, like an old hunter who had discovered the prey that had entered his shooting range. While he was talking, a big knife suddenly smashed the glass and hit his head. Even an evolved person would have never dreamed that he would be attacked by a weak human being. He was caught off guard and had no time to dodge. He was suddenly struck in the chest by a big knife, and dark red blood immediately spattered out from the wound. He immediately shouted and flipped back quickly. He moved so fast that a series of after-images appeared on his body. After his feet stepped on the ground, dazzling lightning flashed. But a series of phantoms also appeared on the figure of the man in the showcase, giving him no chance to resist. Almost in an instant, he rushed in front of him, the blade in his hand burned with blue flames, and stabbed towards his chest like lightning. The two skills demon power and leopard attack were activated by him at the same time, which not only increased his strength by a large amount, but also made his straight line impact speed reach the extreme. A pair of cold eyes flashed past the electric leopard man's eyes in a trance. It was such a familiar look, just like when he was hunting other humans. But he never dreamed that he would see such eyes again. At this time, he actually became the prey. The electric leopard man suddenly had no time to dodge. A long bloodline was cut on his chest, and he involuntarily knocked away a row of small trees behind him. The huge pain caused the electric leopard man to let out a low roar. He was very confused as to why this man wanted to ambush him, but at this moment, a huge sense of crisis had enveloped his head, forcing him to make a quick decision. His hair exploded, and tiny arcs of electricity exploded on his hair. Su Tong glanced out of the corner of his eye and saw that the hairs on the skin of his arms actually stood up one after another. It felt like a weak electric arc was flowing rapidly on his body, and he could even clearly feel the roar in his eardrums that there was something huge. The heavy, murderous thing weighed down like a mountain. In surprise, the electric leopard man's whole body glowed with silver light in front of him. It felt like a huge boulder rolling down from a collapsed mountain, mixed with broken wood and gravel. However, what Su Tong never expected was that the electric leopard man, who he thought was preparing a fatal blow, turned around, and with this powerful force, he knocked away the bushes behind him and rushed in the other direction. Go up. Ran. He blinked his eyes and angrily took out the bone flute and played it. He had noticed this slutty guy early on. In the middle of the night, lights would turn on wherever he went. He was worried that he could not find an evolver who matched him, so there was no reason to let him go when he saw him. In the darkness, the doll in Yan Niang's arms flapped its wings reluctantly and fell down. Su Tong took out a candy from the prop book, stuffed it into the little guy's mouth, and grabbed his calf. Hurry up and catch up. If you lose me, be careful and I will spread your ass. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 104. The doll seemed to be very reluctant. Even the speed of flapping its wings gave people a slow feeling. Su Tong expressed his helplessness. It seemed that Yan Niang had nourished the doll so well that spanking did not hurt. Things that don't itch obviously can't arouse his fighting spirit. So, he held the flower with his hand and pointed it at the little fleshy sack on the baby's crotch. Let's go. Wow. Just hearing a scream, Su Tong's figure rose from the ground and flew into the air in a flash of lightning. The grassy buildings in front of him quickly passed through his eyes, and he could see the blood on the ground in the distance. It's just that the guy ran away too fast. With the help of a doll, I couldn't catch up for a while. However, it was so seriously injured that it definitely wouldn't be able to run far for a while. As he rushed to catch up, he was surprised at the infinite potential of this doll. I don't know how Yan Niang raised this baby. In the past 2 days, I saw her constantly feeding him with blood, and she didn't feed him brain crystals or anything like that. But the strength of this doll seems to be even more amazing than he imagined. If he doesn't have this bone flute in his hand, if he really wants to give up this mission and run away. He couldn't help but think of Yan Niang's whispers. Suddenly Su Tong frowned and looked at the back of his hand. He found that his hairs stood on end one by one. That feeling. An indescribable feeling, like a spear that is about to pierce the soul. Immediately afterwards, a muffled thunder sounded in the distance, as if it was a belated echo after crashing into thousands of mountains and valleys for too long. His expression suddenly changed, and he felt a strong murderous aura coming, which even penetrated deep into his internal organs, making him feel so sad that he wanted to vomit blood. Immediately, he rushed forward without caring about his embarrassment. He let go of his palms and suddenly fell to the ground from a height of 5 meters, and then rolled on the ground in disgrace. Hearing an explosion above his head, he raised his head in surprise and saw an arrow more than 1 meter long, stuck straight into the concrete wall, the tail of the arrow buzzing and trembling. Someone. Seeing this, he suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction where the arrow had come from. He saw a tall and thin figure on the roof of a residential building in the distance, putting away the longbow in his hand, and then turned his back to him, disappearing into the darkness with a bit of arrogance and disdain. Player. Su Tong's eyes darkened. Even with just a quick glance, he could immediately tell the identity of the other party. He was definitely not an evolver. And at this moment, he had already heard the wailing sound from the electric leopard man in the distance. It was obvious that the target he had worked so hard to hunt was now becoming someone else's meal. And this arrow is obviously a deterrent and a stern warning. Ah! Thinking of this, Su Tong's face became even colder. He jumped up and rushed towards the wailing sound. There was already an uncontrollable madness in his eyes. The man who had just turned around on the top of the building was stunned for a moment. He suddenly turned around and saw the hurried figure. He couldn't help but frown, and a hint of impatience flashed in his eyes. He took out the walkie-talkie and said, "Pharmacist, pharmacist, someone has caught up with me, it looks like a player." After releasing the call button, I heard a burst of noise from the intercom, and then a very calm voice came, "Intercept him and ask if he is a good guy or a bad guy. If he is a bad guy, kill him. This guy is difficult to deal with, you have to pay more." The man said as he took out the longbow in his hand again and spoke into the intercom. The response from the other end was simple, 100 script points. The man did not respond. His figure was like an elf quickly shuttled across the roof of the building. His pair of dark blue gem-like eyes quickly captured Su Tong's figure in the gap between the buildings. He jumped up, bent the bow and set the arrow in one go. He didn't even need to aim. His slender fingers slipped and poof, the arrow was quickly buried in the darkness, and made a rustling shaking sound. An animal suddenly came to mind, a rattlesnake. The strange noise made by the arrows, instead of making people aware of the location of the arrows, gave people the illusion of being surrounded. They didn't know where to dodge, as if they might be hit by arrows with every step they took. However, Su Tong's steps did not even hesitate at all. But at the moment when the arrow broke through the air, his feet suddenly seemed to have missed the step, and his body flew out in a very strange posture. The clumsy shape is like a running man stepping on slippery marble and falling out unexpectedly. But it was this unexpected way that caused the arrow to fly past him dangerously and pierce the cement wall of the building in front of him. Huh! The man was startled and cursed this guy's bad luck. He immediately drew his longbow and was about to add another arrow, but he found that the other party's figure had quickly rushed into the blind spot of his sight. Mortal wisdom! The man curled his lips and jumped high into the air. His light steps seemed as natural and unrestrained as those magical light skills in martial arts movies. He stepped on the high wall and quietly appeared on the top of another building. His eyes immediately glanced at Su Tong's running back. "It seems like I don't need to ask you anything." A sneer appeared on the man's face, and a special arrow was placed on the bowstring. The entire arrow shone with silver light, and the triangular arrow shone with a mysterious halo in the dark night. When the bowstring was fully drawn, he whispered softly, The arrow is 50 points in the script, can you dodge it?" However, as soon as he finished speaking, Su Tong, who was running wildly, stopped suddenly. As if he heard what he said, he turned around and slowly raised his middle finger towards him. Although the distance between the two parties was even more than 50 meters, he could still clearly see the arrogant expression on Su Tong's face. He opened his mouth and read with his lips, "Silly bee. Court death." The man's chest gasped, and strong murderous intent surged uncontrollably from his heart. However, just when he was about to let go of his finger and arrow, a strong sense of crisis came from behind him. The sudden chill made the hairs on his back stand up. At this moment, two choices flashed through his mind, shooting arrows and dodging, but unfortunately, it seemed that he could only choose one between the two. And he had to choose the latter, because the sound of breaking wind behind his head no longer allowed him to hesitate for a moment. He immediately pinched his fingers and used the silver arrow as a weapon to quickly sweep it behind him and at the same time rush forward quickly. Snapped. What he never expected was that when he raised his head, he found that there was nothing behind him. When he looked at the arrow in his hand, he found that a small paper man was pierced through the arrow. The weight of the paper man was so light that he didn't even feel the arrow hit anything. At this moment, the paper man actually slowly opened his arms, like opening a banner, and raised a piece of paper high, with only 8 words the size of flies written on it: "The vegetables are picking their feet. Why don't I sneeze? Son of a bitch." Seeing this, the man's face flickered in and out, and his lungs were about to explode. When had he been humiliated like this? If Su Tong's middle finger and curse just now were Chi Kuokuo's provocation. He didn't really take it to heart, but the insult of this note was an insult that went straight to the soul. The other party had obviously calculated where he would end up, and had the opportunity to trick him and seriously injure him, but in the end he just left a note, which was even more uncomfortable than killing him. He wanted to catch up and cut off his head with his own bowstring. However, Su Tong's speed far exceeded his expectations, even when he was delayed. Su Tong-gren had already rushed to the direction of the fierce fight. Surprisingly, the people surrounding and killing the electric leopard man were not the players he expected, but ordinary people, no, strictly speaking, soldiers holding swords and wearing standard equipment. They obviously consumed the same brain crystals as themselves, possessing some special powers and strong physical qualities. Facing the electric leopard man, who was already a trapped beast, they advanced and retreated in an orderly manner, in exchange for maximum damage at the minimum price. Seeing this, Su Tong raised his eyebrows slightly, and while speeding up and running wildly, he activated leopard attack again. The speed suddenly accelerated to an inhuman extreme. Looking at the figure getting closer and closer, he raised the corners of his mouth slightly and muttered 4 words silently. Demon had arrived. The electric leopard man let out a low roar. He probably never dreamed that he had just escaped from the tiger's mouth and turned around to enter the wolf's den. What surprised him even more was that these living people, who he could kill at will, actually had power that was not inferior to his. Could it be that you didn't read the almanac when you went out today? How come there are so many powerful humans? Forget about the people who besieged him. What really frightened the electric leopard man was the figures in white coats behind this group of people. There seemed to be a powerful force among them, giving him a kind of aura overtly or covertly. A strong sense of oppression. He had only encountered such a sense of oppression in the army of infected people not long ago. It was just a look from the leader of that army that made him feel desperate. Quick, kill him. We have guests arriving. The pharmacist who was sitting on the chair couldn't help but frown as he listened to the voice coming from the earphones. He stood up and signaled everyone to kill the evolver in front of them immediately. However, the moment he finished speaking, a dark blue fire suddenly burst out in the darkness and came across the sky under everyone's shocked eyes. The blade, burning with blue flames, drew a terrifying arc in mid-air. A huge roar rumbled from the sword light, and it actually formed a sonic boom-like feeling. The incomparable power caused everyone to feel an uncontrollable fear from deep in their hearts. When the knife fell, the mud and rocks on the ground shattered and flew wildly everywhere. Everyone hugged their heads and fell to the ground. Only the pharmacist seemed to have an invisible force that bounced away the falling gravel. He looked at the man who looked like a demon king in the firelight in front of him in shock. Under his motionless face, his heart was trembling violently. The power of this knife, obtained in exchange for 400 script points, was so shocking that the electric leopard man was instantly wiped out in the fire, leaving only a brain crystal the size of a thumb falling into the man's palm. The man slowly raised his head, and the arrogant and cold look in his eyes made the blood in the pharmacist's body freeze for a moment. "The ones who attacked me just now were your people." The hoarse voice penetrated the coldness of the soul. The pharmacist tensed up and cursed Li Si for being unreliable. Why would he offend such a fierce man? He hurried forward and explained, "Brother, everything is a misunderstanding. We are willing to compensate." Infinite Script Killing. Author, Guo Shui Gan Xiao. Chapter 105. Compensation. Su Tong raised his eyelids, raised the blade and pointed it directly at the pharmacist's nose. He saw an undercurrent of fire on the blade, irradiating half of his face, and revealed a cold smile. "This sword costs 400 script points. You have to pay for it. Can you afford it?" The corner of the pharmacist's mouth twitched, thinking that this guy is really direct. Good guy, one mouth is worth 400 script points. Naturally, he would not believe Su Tong's words, thinking that this was just an excuse for Su Tong to blackmail him. After all, a prop card that consumes 400 script points would be outrageous. But of course the pharmacist didn't dare to say it out loud. He had just stabbed him arbitrarily, and now he was still frightened when he thought about it. Besides, they were totally unreasonable about this matter and couldn't stand up for it. He could only bite the bullet and said, "I can't get the 400 script points for the time being, but I can pay 200 script points plus a bottle of holy water." Holy water is the abbreviation of potion that eliminates negative status. A bottle of this thing is extremely expensive. The value of a bottle is about 80 script points. But the problem is that there is no market for it. It is said that it is only sold through fixed channels, but the quantity sold every day is limited, so even if someone grabs the holy water, they will never sell it easily. Therefore, the price given by the pharmacist is actually quite fair. He casually thrust the big knife into the ground, and the blade was directly inserted into the cement floor. As the fire on his body gradually extinguished, Su Tong's face became colder than before, and he walked up to the pharmacist step by step. Every step he took was very slow, and there was even a deliberate pause between each step. This was a deliberate show of force, and it was also a kind of contempt for them from the bottom of his heart. Not enough. Su Tong stretched out his hand towards the pharmacist, raising his forehead as if he was looking at him through his nostrils. "This is not asking for compensation, it is simply robbery on the road." The pharmacist is also an old player who has experienced the script world 5 or 6 times, but at this time, he can't get angry at all. The impression that the knife just made on them was too terrible. What's more important is that the person in front of him doesn't feel any discomfort at all at this moment, which makes it even more obvious that the strength of the person in front of him is unfathomable. Therefore, the more arrogant the other party becomes, the more unsure the pharmacist feels. After pretending to think deeply, he traded 300 script points to Su Tong, plus a bottle of holy water and a special medical supplies package, which contained 3 powerful stimulants and 2 maca injections. This medical kit is a limited edition military supply. Even in this script world, it is difficult to encounter, and it is enough to offset the gap in the script points. This is already the bottom line in the pharmacist's mind. 300 script points. This debt must be shared evenly with this guy Li Si. Why didn't you tell me that the opponent is so strong, you idiot? The pharmacist cursed secretly in his mind. Fortunately, Su Tong accepted the deal and stared at the pharmacist's face with his deep eyes. He had not spoken yet, but the contempt and sarcasm he showed were clearly revealed. But the pharmacist didn't even dare to raise his head. Wait a moment. At this time, a middle-aged man in a white coat ran from behind and stopped in front of Su Tong. Wait a minute, we are going to the east to find antibodies for the virus. Can you go with us? We really need you like this. People come and protect us. Antibody. He raised his eyebrows and saw the middle-aged man quickly take out a photo. Yes, before the virus broke out, our hospital received a very special case. No symptoms were detected at that time, so a part of the blood was kept for research. But after the virus broke out, we accidentally discovered that the infected people seemed to be very aggressive towards this blood. So after careful study, we found that the child's blood seemed to have a strange compatibility with the virus in the infected people. This is the antibody we are looking for. Su Tong picked up the photo and took a look at it. His face was expressionless, but his heart was filled with waves, and he thought to himself, it's actually him. The child in the photo was pale and thin, but who could this be if he wasn't Xiao Chenzi? I remember that Aunt Wang seemed to have mentioned that Xiao Chenzi's parents took him to many large hospitals for examinations, but all in vain. Combined with the words of the middle-aged man in front of him, the clues were confirmed at once. Thinking that the mission of the ranger was to protect Xiao Chenzi heading east, Su Tong suddenly understood. However, he still returned the photo to the middle-aged man. He was not interested in this task at all. Seeing his indifferent expression, the middle-aged man suddenly became excited. Why, don't you want to find antibodies as soon as possible? Only by finding antibodies can we quickly end the virus. We have carefully studied the virus. This thing is constantly fissioning and evolving. Soon there will even be super virus evolvers, and then the world will be over. Seeing that the professor's occupational disease broke out again, the pharmacist hurriedly stepped forward to pull him away and apologized to Su Tong again and again. However, he changed his voice and asked tentatively, "Brother, your mission should also be to go east, why don't we go together?" Unnecessary. He neatly rejected the pharmacist's suggestion, picked up the knife, put it on his shoulder, and walked forward without looking back. The moon was dark and the wind was high, and the cold wind was solitary. His thin back under the night sky gave people a sense of majesty like a mountain. Even in this purgatory-like world, nothing could stop him. Whether it is players like Yaeshi or soldiers who have been strengthened by eating brain crystals, looking at such a back, their eyes are filled with awe, fear, and even a little envy. Why not keep him? To find antibodies, we need such experts, the professor who just stopped Su Tong asked the pharmacist. The pharmacist smiled bitterly and shook his head. The evil and domineering sword strike and the contemptuous look flashed through his mind. Looking at Su Tong's departure, he felt relieved. Regardless of whether the other party is in the same direction as them, being with such a domineering master will always give people an uncomfortable sense of oppression, so leaving the other party is undoubtedly the best choice. Professor, you have also seen that I am so aloof. Before the pharmacist finished speaking, Su Tong suddenly looked back at them and turned around slowly. The pharmacist's face turned cold, and he suddenly became nervous as if facing a formidable enemy. Is he a bad guy? However, all of the pharmacist's conjectures were not confirmed. Su Tong turned around, but strangely bowed slightly towards them, half bent, and opened his hands, just like the last curtain call of a stage play. What is this guy doing? When everyone was confused by his strange movements, Su Tong suddenly raised his head and made a face at them, slightly. Then he sheathed the sword and ran away. I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but I stumbled unsteadily and almost fell to the ground. The embarrassing and wretched pace formed a sharp contrast with the arrogant figure just now. Ling Yaoshi opened his mouth and stared blankly at Su Tong's back as he ran further and further away. For a moment, his mind was buzzing, his blood pressure was rising and falling, and he was completely confused. It's like, you fell in love with a vase at the market, it cost 50 yuan, and you were so talkative that they reluctantly agreed to give you 48. Just when you were still feeling proud of your bargaining skills, you found out that you didn't have 2 yuan in change when changing the price, so I simply gave you an identical vase. Such a sharp contrast would be a bit unbearable for anyone else, not to mention that Su Tong seemed to have robbed them severely. I. The pharmacist's eyes widened, and a complex feeling swept through his body in an instant. Thinking of his humble demeanor just now and the teasing look in his eyes. Humiliation, anger, deception. Suddenly, the pharmacist's eyes were stained red with bloodshot eyes, as if all the blood in his body was rushing to his head. That kind of manic and uncontrollable mood completely swallowed up his reason in an instant. I blame your 18th generation ancestor, grandson thief, if you have the guts, don't let grandpa meet you again. The extremely angry roar echoed in this dark city, but it was so pale and powerless. After cursing, the pharmacist seemed to be aware of the strange looks that the surrounding soldiers were looking at him. Now he couldn't hold back his face even more. He simply rolled his eyes, lay down on the ground and passed out. On the other side, Su Tong ran all the way, and after making sure that Yao Shi and the others were not catching up, he sat on the ground and laughed. In fact, after that knife blow, he was basically a soft-footed shrimp with only appearance. Although after the awakening skill of demon power was lit, the negative status entry of the Demon King's Advent skill was removed. But the cooling time is still so long. And even if the cooldown time is not mentioned, it is impossible for him to explode with such a powerful sword again. After all, the price of a sword is 40% of the script points. With the blessing of a full 400 script points, his already strengthened physique quickly increased significantly again, which shocked the pharmacist and others. Not only did he successfully get back the loot that was supposed to be his, he also took a big bite out of the pharmacist's body. 300 script points, a bottle of holy water potion that can dispel negative effects, and a combat resource first aid kit. After all, I not only made up for the cost of this sword, still made a little profit. After getting the things, Su Tong fumbled for the bone flute, summoned the little guy over again, grabbed his little hooves, go back. As soon as he heard that he could finally return to his mother's side, the baby didn't need Su Tong's loving encouragement this time, so he flapped his wings and rushed back. In fact, they were not far from where Yan Niang was hiding. According to the speed of the doll, it only takes 5 minutes to get back. After he goes back and swallows the brain crystals of the electric leopard man, he can continue his journey to the west early tomorrow morning. However, as it flew, Su Tong felt something was wrong and slapped the doll on the butt. Are you sure you're not flying in the wrong direction? The doll shook his head blankly. He couldn't speak, so he could only speed up and fly away. The building in front of them flew past them quickly, but the tall building seemed like an airtight wall, and they couldn't fly out no matter how hard they flew. In desperation, Su Tong could only let the doll lower its height, and he landed on the ground first. Unexpectedly, Su Tong's face changed as soon as the doll lowered. What he saw was that he happened to land in front of the gate of an amusement park, and he remembered clearly that Yan Niang had warned him not to get close to this amusement park when he set out. P.S. Fighting scenes have never been my specialty, but the plot needs to be laid out slowly, and I will continue to work on the next update. Demon Power. It is rumored that the Demon King left behind power in the world, but unless one is truly strong, he will only become its slave in the end. Included Skill 1, Demonic Power. It consumes 5 script points. After activation, your own strength will be temporarily doubled for 30 seconds. During activation, you gain a special ability, Demon King's Hand, which can cause magic flame damage to your own hands. Cooling time, 2 hours. Additional Skill 2, The Arrival of the Devil. Consume 40% of your own script points. After activation, physical strength and speed will be increased unprecedentedly. The degree of improvement is related to your own strength and the number of script points consumed. And obtain the effect of the Demon King's armor, and the level of the demon flame is temporarily increased by 2 levels. Duration 30 seconds. Cooling time, 3 days. Awakening skill unlocked, Dark Lord. Awakening skill, Dark Lord. There is no script consumption, and the user makes a deal with the Demon King at the cost of his own life force. After activation, the overall physique will be temporarily increased twice, and the magic flame damage will be increased by 2 levels. Duration, 2 minutes. Cooling time, the devil likes you who are desperate for your life. Note, once the prop card is traded, changed, or awakened, the skill will be closed.